Today I'm in the village of Sybil Headingham in Essex, outside the premises of the Swan Public House. My story concerns a man called Dummy, who on the 3rd of August 1863 was tried by the villagers on the accusations of being a witch. Dummy was an elderly man, believed to be around 80 years old. He was a deaf and dumb mute. It was believed that he was French by origin, although there was no verification of that, and that his tongue had been ripped from his body by the Chinese whilst fighting for the French against the Chinese in a war. It was known that he had lived in the village for 20 years, and for the last 8 years of his life, he resided in a mud hut on the edge of the village. Dummy plied his trade in the village as a fortune teller. He was a cunning man. He gave tarot card readings. He also made good luck spells and magic potions for lovers. And generally, he was regarded as a harmless but eccentric elderly man. But underlying all this, the village was still deeply rooted in the 17th century superstitions of Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General. And one such lady, a lady called Emma Smith, who was the owner of the brew house at Ridgewell in Essex, accused him on that night in the pub of being a witch and of having put a curse upon her and her family. She alleged that Dummy had visited her home one evening and spat on her and cursed her. And she offered him 3 gold sovereigns to remove this curse and to return everything back to normal. Dummy had no knowledge of this, and it was suspected that Emma was in fact mentally disturbed. And despite the offer of 3 gold sovereigns, he rejected it by placing his finger across his throat to indicate that he suspected that had he returned with her, he would be murdered. And so a continual abuse took place that evening of Emma Smith taunting and abusing him, and at one point beating him with a wooden walking stick and also tearing the sleeve of his jacket, getting him to confess to being a male witch. At that point, the other pub regulars joined in and also started pushing him, forcing him to perform a jig and poking fun at him in general. This poor man, being deaf and dumb, was completely unable to express the frustrations that he was suffering, the indignations that was being meted out to him by people that he had previously regarded as his friends.
Joined now by a local carpenter, a Samuel Stammers, Smith decided that Dummy would be swum in this nearby brook to prove him to be a witch. It would be a trial by water.
Under primitive superstition from the 17th century, it was believed that water was holy, and that if a witch was thrown into water and the water rejected them, then they were obviously guilty. If, on the other hand, they died, then they were innocent. So it was a catch-22, and poor Dummy had no chance of winning this battle. Having arrived at the embankment, poor Dummy was thrown into the water. Poor Dummy floundered in these cold waters for some minutes, attempting to escape. He desperately tried to climb either embankment, but on each attempt, either Smith or Stammers would push him back into the waters. And after a few minutes, Stammers had a twinge of guilt. It was obvious that poor old Dummy was succumbing to the cold waters, and decided that enough was enough, and removed poor Dummy from the water and took him back to his mud hut on the outskirts of the village. It wasn't until the following day, on the 4th of August, that a goodwill wisher from the village called around to see poor Dummy and discovered that his clothes were still wet and that he had a very high temperature and in fact was almost in a coma. Concerned for his health, he was removed immediately to Halton Poor Hospital, where he was interned and looked after by the nursing staff. But unfortunately, a month later, on the 4th of September 1863, poor old Dummy succumbed to his injuries and also to the cold. On the 25th of September 1863, Superintendent Elsie, who was charged with the case following the report into Dummy's death by Dr. Sinclair, at the Hampstead poorhouse, arrested both Stammers and Smith, where they were taken to Castle Hedingham police station behind me, where they were charged with causing the death of Dummy, also known as the Old Frenchman.
On March the 8th, 1864, the two accused stood next to each other in the dock at the Assize Court in Chelmsford. They both pleaded not guilty. Smith told the court that the deceased had come to her house, had spat at her, and told her that after a time she would become ill, and she was ill. She'd even called a doctor twice in one night, but he couldn't cure her. Dummy, she told the court, made her ill and bewitched her. A telling witness against the two accused was a girl called Eva Henrietta Garrett, described as a 10-year-old precocious child. Despite her tender years, she unfolded in clear terms the events of the night in court. The defence made strenuous efforts to discredit her, but her evidence was enough to place the guilt of Smith and Stammers beyond doubt. Much was made of the mental state of Smith and the fact that Stammers had pulled the old man out of the water. The judge, Sir William Earle, took these factors into account when he sentenced them both to 6 months' hard labour.